Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is the Interactive Exhibit Displays Across Virtual Worlds presentation. My name is Brian Perry, or as you're seeing me here in Second Life, Brian Aviator. We're going to start off today with, I'm just going to do some introductions, hopefully just introduce who I am for those of you that don't know me and why you might want to spend the next hour here with us. Um, and I appreciate everybody who came to this. We're going to be speaking about our team's journey in putting together some cross-world interactive displays. Um, the idea is that we were creating a display system that we can use across different virtual worlds and as well to support other things, which we'll be talking about as well. We're also going to be covering our AI docents. I actually moved ahead just a little too quickly there. That tie in with our display system. So I hope to speak a little bit about that. That's one of our latest creations. And then I'm going to wrap up with opening up the floor for some questions and discussion. Okay, so who am I and why might you want to spend the next hour of your time here with us? Well, I'm a computer scientist. I primarily work in the life science industry in clinical research. And my professional areas of expertise are around the application of information technologies to human clinical trials, um, particularly in pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and pharmacovigilance, which is just a fancy word for saying that monitoring the safety of medicinal products and devices. In addition, I've also worked on episentinel surveillance systems. Again, another fancy word for saying computer systems that track incoming data and information from around the world to look for potential epidemic signals or even potentially bioterrorism signals. I've been a resident here in the virtual world of Second Life since roughly early 2006. And in many of those years, I've worked on educational experience, such as virtual museums, and we'll talk a bit on the next slide about what some of our museums are in Second Life. There's a website on the screen, and I'll post it to the chat a little bit later, but we do have a website about our museums, and there's my email address, brian@vmuseum.org, if anyone wants to reach out for any reason. Um, so I've been here for a little while, done a few things, but probably the thing that most people might know me for, who do know me, is the virtual museum team and the properties that we've built out in Second Life. And there's a few different museums. Probably the one of two that get the most traffic is the Museum of Computing History. But we also, within the last year, added a Museum of Telecommunications. Our oldest museum is actually the LGBT History Museum and Cultural Center. That particular museum has been around since late 2006 and covers uh, a lot about sort of the journey of the LGBT community, its history, its culture. And it's existed in various forms within Second Life in various locations since 2006. Brevin Cat Island is another new creation of ours. It's actually a sort of a more whimsical build, but the goal is to educate folks about our feline friends. It became obvious to me that pretty quickly that this was a popular topic. You know, who'd have thought people that are on the internet like cats? So, and then lastly, our newest creation, which just went online 2 weeks ago in terms of being a full-time presence, is the Bay City Museum, which is actually something that's really dedicated to Second Life. It is based on the Linden Department of Public Works and the moles. They're contractors that are involved in creating many of the experiences, such as the Linden Homes, Bay City itself, for instance, as well as other builds within Second Life. And so this museum called the Museums celebrates their efforts over the years. Okay, moving on to the topic. Yes, the moles are great. We're going to be speaking initially here about our efforts to build cross-world interactive exhibit displays. Now, to ensure that we're on the same page, I want to talk a bit about why we might want to build cross-world interactive displays, why we would need them, and what is their purpose. The idea behind these displays is the concept to create museum display content, in our case, museum display, but it could be any kind of educational or information sharing content. We wanted to be able to build it once and deploy it to multiple locations, both within a virtual world like Second Life, but also across virtual worlds. So we're working to do this both in Open Simulator and Roblox at the moment as well, and certainly have aspirations to be able to expand to other locations as well. And again, each virtual world has a different user interface. They have a different set of constructs for building objects. They have different scripting and programming languages. And we wanted something that would be flexible, that we could leverage the strengths and weaknesses of each. And another goal was content changes. One of our museums is the Museum of Computing History. It has a couple of exhibits in it that are rather dynamic topics these days. One that you're going to hear about a lot here at this conference is AI. You can't escape AI, in the news anywhere at this point. It's moving quickly. It's something I follow very closely, and it changes constantly, which means we have to constantly add content or tweak content at the museum, and having a display system that's flexible where we can easily deploy updates and have them automatically propagate to the different museum properties that we have, it was a design goal for us. At the beginning of the project, we decided to lay out some requirements. What were the key things that we must have and want to have in our displays? And one of the first and most important requirements was that the displays had to work across different virtual world platforms. While Second Life is the place we do most of our stuff currently, we certainly have goals of being able to expand to other virtual worlds and are actively working on that. And as well, we want to be able to support multiple locations within Second Life. We occasionally get asked to do sort of satellite museum locations throughout Second Life, and it's fantastic if we can utilize the tools that we already have to deploy that content, keep it up to date, and keep it consistent across our different properties. The other thing that we wanted to do was leverage the strengths and weaknesses of each of the virtual worlds. Here in Second Life, we have a lot of different ways that displays and objects can be interactive with. That may be more limited in other platforms, or in some, that are more three-dimensional in terms of having head-mounted displays, etc. They may have different ways of being able to present and access content. And we wanted to have the flexibility to support all of them to the best extent that we could. And that includes things like the Second Life viewer, for instance, the mobile apps. There's a mobile viewer currently in, development. If you haven't tried it, you may want to check it out sometime. As well as things like head-mounted displays for more virtual reality type experiences. And again, we wanted to be able to support platforms like Second Life, also like Roblox. For anyone that was just at the keynote, you probably heard about just how big Roblox is, and the sort of diverse community that's there. And so it certainly is a place we'd like to try to bring our museum content. Um, in addition, we are experimenting with other technologies such as Unity. Unity is a development environment for building games or 3D virtual experiences, and it can run on mobile devices, head-mounted displays, etc. And we wanted to be able to support that as well. And again, we have the goal of being able to create contents once and deploy it everywhere from a single location, to the extent, of course, that we can. And so the displays need to be able to support different interaction modalities. That can include things like text chat, visual images, photographs, etc. Long form text. Second Life has note cards, which work quite well for that. And as well as web content for the platforms that allow us to link with um, with that. And Day, I see that you're asking questions about how we move content between the worlds, and actually that's what we'll be getting to shortly. So thanks for leading me into that. But we will certainly be covering that shortly. And since we're creating and storing all of this content, we want to have access to use it to build other capabilities beyond just the displays. And before we finish today, we're going to talk about our AI guide bots and docents that leverage this system as well. And again, as well as games. That's another area that we are certainly interested in is particularly as we look toward things like Roblox, the ability to gamify the experience of learning. Okay, so how do we do this? As Dave just said, these are different platforms. Unity and building in Unity and displaying information in Unity, etc., is different than Second Life. And by the way, it is different in Roblox as well to some extent. Roblox imposed some limitations that we'll be talking about that we wanted to address. But the key thing that we realized we wanted to have was a central location with all of the data about the displays and exhibits that we have within the museums. And of course, since we want to be able to support things like Second Life, Roblox, Unity, perhaps VR chat, other platforms in the future, that needs to be in a neutral way and a neutral location. We can't do that within Second Life and necessarily have it be accessible in a usable form in a different environment. So we needed to have that information in a central location and neutral from the virtual worlds that we're supporting with it. And so ideally we decided, as I'm a computer scientist, and well, for me, a database is the way to solve that problem. And for our particular system, we chose an open source database called MySQL. Um, but certainly, if dealing with relational databases isn't your thing, there are cloud-based solutions such as Airtable, there's Google Firebase, there's others that you could certainly leverage to do the same thing without having to write code necessarily. So there are options out there. For ours, we chose MySQL. And again, there are a lot of tools out there. There are also databases such as that are called NoSQL databases where you can store information. We figured for the kinds of data that we wanted to collect, a relational database was the best option for us today. Obviously, we're going to continue to evaluate that over time, but that's what we currently decided on. But the key is that the data needs to live outside of the virtual worlds. We couldn't deploy this just in Roblox, for instance, and necessarily have it available in Second Life or in other platforms. So we needed to be in a neutral location outside of the virtual worlds. And so for this database, we needed to figure out what do we want to store and how do we need to store it so that we can make it available in the different virtual worlds. And while there were some obvious data points that we needed to collect, um, one was we just wanted some general information in there about the museums that we have and the general sort of exhibits that we have. And that information isn't necessarily going to get displayed on a display or an exhibit, but it is information we wanted in the database to tie things together. And so we have information. We, for instance, just have a list, a data table containing our museum list in it. We have another one containing a list of the main exhibit areas in each museum. And the point of those is to be able to tie the different displays and exhibits to the museums and locations where they're located. We also wanted to store information about each display. We decided we were going to give each display a unique display ID code. It's just a code that identifies the display and what kind of contents it has. And I'll show you an example of that a little bit later. We also wanted some information just about the look of the display. So, what kind of color might be in the border or the background of the frame, for instance. If there's a nameplate, what text would be on the nameplate? Now, that's one area that differs between virtual worlds. So, for instance, in Second Life, we can't easily render text on an object. People have created workarounds that called XY text boards, etc., but they tend to be sort of a higher in resource utilization and have a lot of faces on them for purposes of textures and stuff, and it's not the same as rendering text on a surface, which some other platforms do support, for instance. But we do store nameplate text. We also store information about where the displays are located within the museums. And again, that's not information the display will use, but as you'll see later, it's information we can use in other ways. We also wanted to store textual information about the content of the display. So um, some of the displays will respond in chat. So here in Second Life, our displays can respond in chat. And so we wanted to be able to store that text that the display would provide in the database. In addition, there's long form text that we want to give out to folks. Now, in Second Life, we do that through note cards, but that information, or at least pointers to those note cards, are in the database. And then as well, for platforms that support them, we wanted to be able to store web URLs, links to information out on the public internet that can either be launched in an external browser or within the Second Life viewer, the browser that's available here. So that was some other information we wanted to have there. We also wanted to have image and photo information. So our displays in Second Life, which you'll see in a bit, have an area for a photo. They have an area for a nameplate if we use them. And we wanted to be able to store either URLs to those for the platforms that can retrieve that data over the web, or in cases like Second Life or Roblox, where you can store those kind of assets in inventory, we wanted to be able to have pointers to them. And so that was something we wanted. And Second Life, that's done through what's called a UUID. Um, Anyone who's worked with applying textures to faces, or being able to, for instance, these wonderful display boards we have here for our presentations, we have to provide the UUIDs to all of our slide textures. It's just a way of pointing to the texture in our inventory. Roblox has a very similar thing. It's called an RBX asset ID, a Roblox asset ID within Roblox. Same basic concept. And so, as I mentioned, the UUIDs are how we identify assets. They're stored within inventory in Second Life, and again, we use the same thing in Roblox. We also, in the case of Second Life, because we can't render nameplate text, I know there's actually a feedback thing out there on the feedback.secondlife.com. I think Signal Linden started one about wanting to add functionality to be able to render text on a surface of an object. I think that would be awesome. I'm all for it. I voted for it. Um, it would certainly be better than the XY text that we have now. And for our museum, we decided just to use very small textures for the nameplate. So we do like a 256 by 128 in most cases, or a 512 by 256, depending on how detailed we need it to be for our nameplates. So we do those as textures as well. Once we have our database, we needed to be able to access it. And we need to be able to access it from different kinds of virtual worlds and technologies. Well, it turns out that pretty much all virtual world systems had sort of this idea in mind, the ability to access data outside of the virtual world. And the way that they do that, and the way that just to folks that understand how this works, that it makes obvious sense, is to use open internet protocols like HTTP and HTTPS to exchange information. Um, we can do that easily using LSL calls here in Second Life. Roblox has pretty much exactly the same kind of functionality. And as well within Unity, we can from script code, query web resources. So it turns out it pretty much is something that can work in virtually any virtual world. In addition, most virtual worlds also have library functions within their programming to be able to exchange encoded data in another standard called JavaScript object notation. Um, Usually sort of summed up with the acronym JSON, uh, pronounced by many as Jason, although others pronounce it JSON. Uh, Whatever, potato, whatever your favorite flavor of that is. But virtually all the platforms, Second Life, Roblox, and certainly the programming languages available within Unity allow you to be able to work with JSON formatted data very nicely. And so we opted to do that. So we're making our database available through uh, web APIs that we've developed. They run on a public web server. When I say public, I mean it's on the public internet. It is protected through keys and passwords so that only our displays can utilize the data on it for security reasons and safety reasons. Um, but this combination of basically using open web protocols with JSON formatted data gives us virtually a universal approach to being able to access data from within diverse virtual worlds. And that's one of the things that we decided on very early on. And we provide this access through some very simple web APIs that we built ourselves. And so that's something we've written and coded ourselves. As a computer scientist, that's what I do as part of my living. But it doesn't mean you have to be able to code to be able to do something like this. Certainly, if you use things like Airtable or some of the online database, they do provide web API access to the data. And so you don't have to be a software engineer or developer to necessarily be able to do something like this. I just like to point that out. But again, using this method, our displays, when they start up, they query the database based on their display ID code that we've decided to assign to them. And from there, the database returns all of the information they need to configure themselves and go online and become interactive for visitors. In addition, we can set the displays to query the database periodically. Depends how much we think we're going to be changing the data, sort of the latency that we'd want to have on that. But it certainly means that the displays can query the database occasionally and see if there's any up-to-date information, which, as I mentioned, for some of our topics, like the Computing History Museum, the AI stuff and the quantum computing stuff, for instance, is a moving target that keeps changing. And so we want to keep that information fresh. And by being able to do that in a single database and then have that propagate and be available across all the properties where we have our information, that is certainly uh, one of the goals that we had to achieve here. Okay, so once we had the database in place and the ability to access it, we started making the displays. And I know this slide's a little bit busy. If anybody wants copies of the slides or whatnot, just ask me. I plan to put up a PDF with the slides online and can give you a URL to pull those down. But within Second Life and Open Simulator, we actually created a number of different display forms and formats. You can see in the picture on the left at the bottom. a number of those, from sort of floor standing models all the way up through sort of tabletop and models or wall mounted displays. And some of them have 3 panels for information, some have 2. Um, and again, they query the data as to what to put on those panels from the database, and the database drives what ends up appearing on those based on the display ID that we put into the objects. Yes, we had to write LSL code to enable these displays to be able to do these things, but that was done once, and you don't need to know code to be able to deploy displays. All you need to do is set the ID, which we set in the description field. I'll show you that in a bit on one of the slides. And then once you do this, the display configures itself from the database automatically. The displays in Second Life and Open Simulator, um, as I mentioned, are built on the LSL programming language, which works in both. And the other thing I'll say about them is we leverage all of the sort of modes that we can do in Second Life. So we have text chat. So by default, most of the displays, if you click them, give you roughly an 80 to 100 word summary of the information that display pertains to, and typically associated with the photo, etc. If you click a second option, you can get note card text. So it'll basically deliver a note card to you that you can keep and store in your inventory. And for most of our museums, that is much longer form content. Things like, you know, information for Wikipedia pages, for instance, with very detailed information with a lot of sections, multiple pages, etc. And as well, when we can, we provide web URLs so you can click and see information out in a web browser. And so we support all 3. It doesn't mean that every display uses all 3 modes. That's again driven by how we set up the records in the database. But when we have all 3 modes of information, we provide the options, and they show up on that bottom red panel as buttons. All displays at a minimum support text chat, but we try wherever possible to also have note cards or web browser access. Now, looking on the right-hand side, that's our display for Roblox. In that, now you'll see it's a little bit simpler. We have just a single sort of display design for Roblox, um, and it uses a very similar approach to the way we did them in Second Life. So, Roblox has the concept of something called a surface GUI, where you can set areas for textual information. You can have nameplates with rendered text, which is something we don't have in Second Life. And you can have areas where you can display photos or other content. Um, in the case of both Second Life and Roblox, displays are interactive. So they respond to click or touch based on various spots within the object. And so again, we in Roblox, we leverage only text chat. And there's a reason for that. There are limitations in Roblox. We cannot, for instance, easily provide the equivalent of a note card that somebody can take with them because of the way the Roblox system is developed. In addition, we cannot link to web browser. We can't have a web browser within the world or provide access to web content. And a lot of this is the fact that Roblox is a system that has been traditionally sort of viewed and used by a much younger user base than Second Life. I think I've seen some of the stats. It's almost entirely children, in terms of statistical relevance. Though it does seem to be skewing, upwards as some of those children get older and grow up, but stay in Roblox. So it is changing, and they are having more sort of I will call more content targeted at a more adult audience. But again, it's still highly curated. Any image that I upload, for instance, while in Second Life, I can upload any image I want and it shows up in my inventory and it's there and I can use it and display it, within the terms of service. If I upload images in Roblox, they are immediately moderated. They are reviewed, I believe, both by AI type tools and automated tools, as well as human moderators as well. So I just wanted to mention that. All right. Um, so yes, as somebody said, chat censoring in Roblox makes you go nuts. Indeed, they do censor. So we try to make sure the content we have in the text chat is not going to be subject to their censors. So in this particular, um, we wanted to just show a look at the overall architecture. So at the center is the data repository. That's our database with the web API server that can serve multiple virtual worlds. Um, in each of the worlds, on the left, you see Second Life and Open Simulator, which are, for all intents and purposes, virtually the same. We use the same exact objects, the same exact LSL scripts, same exact technology for them to provide content. The displays in Roblox, as you know, are a little more limited, but again, they all access using these web standards and JSON formatted data. They get their information from the web and API server um, and configure themselves. And so the same display with the same ID code in both Second Life and Open Simulator and Roblox, in all three, will configure for the same content and provide the same information within the limits of the worlds that they exist in. And so I mentioned we do note cards in Second Life and Open Simulator. Well, in order to hand those out, we also have an in-world server that runs within each of our museums that contains copies of all the note cards. And so if somebody clicks on a display and indicates they want a note card, uh, the display sends a message to the note card server and says, please deliver this note card to this person, and the note card server does that. But again, the note card servers configure themselves via the database to be able to know what content's available and which displays to accept requests from and such. Yes, Beth, you will. These are new displays. These have just been deployed in recent weeks, so they're different from what was there. And yes, Christy, this is a standardization based on the entry point. That is exactly the design here. Okay. And then lastly is our team. So we create content. And so we use a standard web browser to be able to manage the database. And then for the virtual worlds to deploy the objects, build the objects, all of that kind of stuff, we use the standard Second Life and Firestorm viewers for the Second Life and Open Simulator. In addition, we use Roblox Studio to do Roblox. And then at the bottom, it says Worlds TBD. I don't know where we're going to be next. I think Unity is probably it, but we shall see. We're figuring this out. And thank you, Beth, for sharing the landmark to our exhibit. We do have an exhibit here that shows just a little bit of content from each of our museum, but it does in fact have these displays. It's tied into the central database, so it in fact has the same content as the museums. Okay. So what do the displays look like? So on the left, in sort of in the middle-ish there, is a display in Second Life and Open Sim. It's from the Museum of Computing History, and it's providing information about Alan Turing, who is a very historic figure in computer science. And you can see at the bar at the bottom, it can respond with text chat, note card, or browser. On the right is that same display, pulling that same data from the database, showing that Alan Turing display within Roblox. In the other windows, which you'll have to zoom in if you want to see, but you'll see, for instance, we have a code in the description field or the name field within Roblox that says MOCH_Turing. That's the display ID code. We came up with the concept of museum name underscore content name. And so this is Museum of Computing History, Turing, Alan Turing's display. And that same code put in both worlds will render the display to configure itself for that content. Okay. And so we just showed that. So I just want to talk a little bit about where we're at in the process. So as of the end of March, so as of last weekend, there are 737 displays deployed in Second Life across 5 of our museum experiences. I know that number is exact because I queried the database for it. So that is exactly how many displays are configured in the database currently as of March 31st, and I don't think we've added any this particular week. They've been getting used at all the museums, and we're not observing any issues. We did test them pretty heavily before we deployed them, so they are generally working pretty well. In addition, we've deployed about 25 copies of the displays and some note card servers to a region we have in Open Simulator. It's a grid we created ourselves. It is completely barren. If you went there right now, it just is literally some buildings and some displays. Um, we are expecting to spend some effort building out the museums in Open Simulator. For all 4 of our main museums, we won't be putting the museum in Open Simulator because it really is Second Life specific. But the plan is to build those out sort of starting in the summer of this year. In Roblox, we've deployed about a dozen test displays and have been testing them in a world that we have called the Museum of Computing History. Um, that is actually works already beginning there, and there's a goal to launch that by the end of the second quarter of 2025. So we're hoping to launch one museum in Roblox and gain experience there. And as I mentioned before, there's been some early exploratory development. I do have a display working in Unity. Um, and I've yet to try it, but I actually want to try to fire it up in my Apple Vision Pro at some point to actually experience it there as well. But again, very early at this point. And again, it's exploratory. We're not sort of at this point having any immediate plans to deploy museums, but we think Unity is a powerful platform for doing that, and we'd love the ability to be able to have a native museum application that can run on, mobile devices directly, that can run in head-mounted displays, etc. So we are very interested in doing that. So these are some of the displays in action in our museum. So in the upper, you can actually see the museum, which is the museum we just launched a couple of weeks ago. The particular exhibit you see there in the photo is about Bay City, which was one of the first creations of the Linden Department of Public Works and the moles. And you can see there's a few different modes on these. Some of them have 2 buttons, some have 1. So some are chat only, some are chat and browser. So there's different forms there. Below, you can actually see some of the tabletop and floor models that we have of displays from our Museum of Computing History. And these have all 3 modes on them on their buttons. So they really are pretty flexible, and we can configure them however we need. And if you'd like to try out any of them, Beth, you had mentioned and actually, Lovejoy, that is the 401. That's a 1401. Exactly, it's an IBM 1401. And so, as Beth mentioned, she gave out a landmark to our exhibit here at the Virtual World. You can actually try out some of the displays there, or we also invite you to come to our full museum. The Museum of Computing History has several hundred displays in exhibits on 2 floors in a very large museum. We have a lot of exhibits there and information. And we invite you to visit the museums if you haven't and check them out. Roxy, I can provide you with links to the museums. In addition, if you go to our exhibit here at Virtual World's Best Practices, there are kiosks for each of our museums, and you can click on them to get note cards about the museum as well as landmarks as well. But I'll give them out to anybody that wants them before we leave today. All right, so there were some challenges building these displays, and I just want to share them. First and foremost, it was time consuming to build this. The database and web API development wasn't all that big of a deal. I'm a computer scientist. I'm a geek. I'm a nerd. It's what I do. And so building the database and building the web API and testing it really just took a few days of work. And of course, as we're building the displays and other things and the content, I was able to refine it and tweak it. And so that is, it took some time to do that. But again, you could use cloud-based tools if you preferred. Um, the other thing to bear in mind, and Christy, yes, this could absolutely be used for remote education. Our application is museums, but that is not the only potential application of something like this. Um, I also wanted to say that, a lot of time was spent uh, creating the content. And so we already had a lot of displays on our old system deployed at the museum, hundreds literally, but we needed to convert them in to be able to be in the database and support the new system. And that took us about 2 months of time. And there were two of us doing that on a part-time basis. Every bit of information we put in for a display in an exhibit was done by one person and then completely reviewed by another. And thank you, Beth, for sharing the note card. Really appreciate that. And so it took a lot of time to build the content. But once we've built it, it's now available and we can use it anywhere, including in other virtual worlds once we have the displays. The displays themselves, they're mesh objects. They're meshes here in Second Life, and in Roblox Studio, it was very similar. We used the Roblox Studio tools. Actually, Beth, they probably, I will give an updated one, Beth, before we leave, because some of the museums moved in late 2024. We had an issue where we had to move for more space. So the card you handed out may not have the most recent landmarks. We've had to move. We just ran out of space on the mainland, and so I'll do that. But again, just basic objects. There are prefabs available if you look on the marketplace or whatever. So if you're not exactly a builder, there's kiosks or things you could certainly use if you wanted to build your own system. In addition, if somebody really wanted our objects to use them for some reason, you're welcome to contact me about that. I'd be happy to help you or give you some. And then also the scripting. Um, it requires scripting skills. Again, nothing we're doing here is rocket science, but it does require skills to do. And so there's always plenty of people, within the world that are willing to help. And so certainly you can leverage that. And then lastly, you can consider using AI chatbots. ChatGPT, Claude, um, Google Gemini, all are capable of writing LSL code. They can get a little weird when you're doing something very esoteric, but they are generally able to help you with those kind of things. So I just want to mention that. You could potentially do that. Okay, moving along. What's next? Well, we built this database and all of this information in a central repository. There's a lot of things we can do with it. One thing we thought about is just having a web interface to the content, having a web virtual museum that you can go to. We also want to do some gamification. We'd like to be able to create some games. We're currently prototyping a quiz game that where people can go to our museums, accumulate points, and potentially get prizes for doing those quizzes. In addition, we've created our docent guidebots, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit more. But one important thing, once we have all this data about our exhibits, we can expose that data to the bots and the docents so that they can answer questions about what we have at the museum, as well as using their large language models, speak about the topic in general. And so I actually want to go on and start talking about our docents and guidebots to wrap up. It's something new that we've been working on. I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's been quite enjoyable project and leverages the display system that we've built and all of the data that's in it. Um, So I just want to level set. What am I saying when I'm talking about a guide bot or a docent bot? Well, it is an avatar in our case. So we're not using, in our case, animesh objects or objects that you certainly could choose to implement them that way instead of using an avatar. And so, but we chose to use an avatar. And we wanted that avatar to be able to answer questions, have knowledge about our exhibits, and leverage a large language model to be able to communicate about the topics of our museums. And that's what we set out to do. And why might we want to do this? Well, in our case, our museums are entirely funded by us. My spouse and I basically provide the funding for our museums, and we don't currently ask for any donations or other things. Um, and so this is entirely volunteer. It's a not-for-profit effort, etc. So that's something. And again, we don't accept donations currently or ask for tips or anything. That's not what we're here for. And so a bot can give us the ability to be there all the time because we can't. In addition, bots driven by LLMs can speak a lot of languages that we cannot. I fluently speak English at least on most days, and can do some French, and I do know swear words in a couple of other languages, but I am not multilingual. So um, that is something that it's great to have the bots for. Um, and so, what were some requirements for our bots? Well, one of the things that was very important to us early on, like Klingon, yes, um, we wanted our bots to be completely transparent that they were bots. We don't want them to pretend that they're human beings or to deceive people in any way. We just don't think that is ethical. And so all of our bots have a group tag above their heads that say that they're a bot, and that if people want to interact with them, they should send an IM. By the way, particle physics, physicists, I've never tried Klingon, but I honestly am going to do that right after this because I want to know if it works. I wouldn't be surprised if the LLMs are aware of Klingon, so it's quite possible. Uh, but anyway, continuing on, we wanted to make the bot aware of the museum and what's around it and what's there. And well, we just happen to have all that information in our database, so that's fantastic. Um, in addition, there are other things that we felt would be important for our bots. They needed to be friendly and conversational, but we don't want them to pretend to be your friend. We don't want them to pretend to be available as romantic interests, and we certainly never want them to talk about adult topics. That's just not the goal of our museums. We want them to stick to the topics of the museums. We don't want them to try to venture out into other topics where it might get controversial very quickly. And we don't want them to lie or make things up wherever possible. LLMs, for anyone that's used AI LLMs, they're prone to a phenomenon called hallucinating, which we do not want our bots to do as much as we can control that. Um, Thankfully, most of the commercially available large language models are well trained in the topics our museums cover. So it means our bots are knowledgeable about the topics that we have at the museums. And again, we also wanted to be responsible with our deployment. So we're not deploying bots to be a replacement for human docents or guides. If somebody wants a tour of the museum, I'm still perfectly happy to do those and want to do that. I'm not trying to replace people. But I recognize I can't be there all the time and I can't speak all the languages that I might need to. So the bot is absolutely useful for that purpose. And lastly, I don't want the bots to be trained on questionable or copywritten content. So we certainly have made sure that all the content we have fed the bots is available, either under public domain or things like that. However, we do recognize that we are using commercial large language models, which may or may not be um, as diligent about that. But to the extent that we can control it, we do that. And so that's just some goals. So I want to state out, in order to create the bots, we tried using the Second Life AI characters. It's something that Linden Lab launched in late 2024. They're in alpha test. They're still available today. Anybody who's a premium subscriber can go to characters.secondlife.com, create one, bring it in world, play with it on, you have to use an alt for it. Um, and it's been originally designed to be a personal companion. So I tried to use that to create a bot for a docent bot for our museum. And I tried to give it a backstory with information about you're a docent, et cetera, et cetera. And when I brought them in world, they acted like docent bots, sort of. Um, but we had a few problems with them. Number one, they really tried to be friendly. They would engage in romantic talk, etc. Because I think the fundamental design of them from Linden Lab and from Convey, their partner, is for these to be companions. And so that was a bit of a problem. The other problem we had is they lied like troopers. They just made things up. They said we had exhibits we didn't have. They said the museum had been around for years, that it had not, and that it had all kinds of events planned and whatever, and none of them were true. However, some of them were amazing ideas and are going to lead to future exhibits. I can tell you that because they were great ideas, but they just didn't exist at the museum. And there's another problem we had. There are bugs. As you can see from the picture on the screen, the bot just held its arm out in a T position, and they do this frequently. Uh, I think some of that is being worked on. I don't know if it's been fixed yet, but last I used them, they still were doing that, just standing there with the arms out. Um, and so at this point, just to be clear, we didn't think that the character bots from Linden Lab were appropriate for us. They just didn't meet our requirements. But that's today. We are absolutely continuing to test them, and we'll continue to evaluate them because we think they hold a lot of promise. But today, it just didn't meet our requirements. And so, what did we do? Well, I mentioned before I'm a computer scientist, and well, we can't help ourselves. We solve problems by writing code. And so I created some of my own custom AI docent bots for our museums. I'm going to go through this real quick because I know we're running out of time, but they're written in C sharp. They leverage the Libre Metaverse library, which is an open source library to simulate Second Life and Open Simulator clients, and so we're leveraging that. We're using a commercially available large language model, the GPT-4o mini model, available from OpenAI. We do try other models and play with them, but that's the one we're currently using for the bots that are out at the museums. And we have a system prompt which we've developed that has context, instructions, and museum information, so the bot is very knowledgeable about where they are. And they meet all our requirements. We have complete control over their behavior within the constraints of what we can do with an LLM. The bots query the exhibit display system so they know everything we have at the museum, can tell you where it's located and what content it has. And the GPT-4o mini LM has extensive knowledge about our museum topic, so it can speak knowledgeably about the exhibits that we have, as well as additional information about the history of computing for the computer museum, for instance, etc. And so our custom bots right now are meeting all of our requirements, but they weren't without challenges. I mean, developing a custom bot required me to generate about 1,300 lines of C sharp code. And while I'm a computer scientist, that's what I do. But I know not everybody can do that. I also had to understand the Libre Metaverse library. I had never used it before, and there's not a lot of documentation online about it. So I kind of had to read the source code to figure out how to use it. Again, wasn't a huge challenge, but it took time. Um, some other things to bear in mind, since we're controlling an avatar, this isn't scripts running within Second Life. This is software running outside of Second Life that basically acts like a viewer and controls an avatar. The other thing to bear in mind is that and in our case, we just run them on a cloud server that we already have. It's running Linux, in fact. Um, but it's also important to know we're using commercial web APIs, and those cost money. It's not costing us much most of the time, but if the bots were to get a lot of use, that could certainly become more expensive over time. And that's also why we chose 4.0 Mini. It's pretty inexpensive, but it has a lot of the knowledge we need. And then lastly, there's a lot of controversy about AI in Second Life going on right now. And we don't know how welcome the bots will be in Second Life. And I can say utilization has been lower than we expected. A lot of people go by the bots and do not use them. And we don't know if that's just cultural within Second Life or if it's not clear. We might put up more signage to see if it changes, but they're not getting used very much. And so you know, there's a lot to learn. Basically, we're in very early beta, and so we just don't know. But we think a lot of discourse has to happen around AI, and we need to figure out where this is going. All right, just meeting our bots here a little bit. These are 4 of the bots we have. The one on the left of the Computer Museum, the one next to her, our LGBTQ Museum, our Cat Museum, and our Museum. We have a 5th one at the Telecom Museum, but I just didn't want the slide to get too busy. But they are avatars, and you can actually go to any of our museums, IM them, and if you're interested, I would encourage and ask you to do it because we would appreciate it. And if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. So what's next? Well, we definitely want to continue to keep an eye on the SL characters because we think they have a lot of promise. Again, I recognize they're early alpha. They don't quite meet our need, but they're well done. And I'm looking forward to seeing those get built further out by the Lindens. In addition, we're going to continue to refine and develop our own bots because we think it's important to learn and to develop this content. So we're going to continue doing that. It's also important to continue monitoring the situation. There's just a lot of discourse going on in AI and a lot of sort of pushback from certain elements within the world. And we want to know whether these bots are going to be welcome here or not. And we just don't know. And so we're going to keep an eye on that. And then next, we want to try to deploy these to other virtual world platforms. There are limitations potentially doing something like Roblox, but we probably will deploy to Open Simulator when we launch the museums there, and possibly in Unity as well if we go that route. Stay tuned. We'll figure that out as we go. Okay, so I just want to recap a little bit. We talked a bit about our cross-world displays today and how we built them and deployed them in OpenSim and Roblox, some of the challenges we had with them and such, the requirements, and why we built it the way we did. And then we also talked a little bit about the work we did on AI Docents and Guidebox and how we tied those in to the system so that we could leverage the information that we put together. They do work together very nicely. And there's so many options for what we can do from here. So here's some information on our museums. So the Museum of Community History and Telecom are both in Pippin. We have the LGBTQ in McLean, Brevin Cat Island in Brevin, and the Bay City Museum in Bay City Brewster. The museum team is I sort of am the creator and the curator. Kevin Cerulean, who is here, helps with quality assurance and making sure I don't mess up. And we have Timothy McGregor also here visiting us today, who has helped us with a number of builds and such as well. I always say Kevin likes to point out what I do wrong, and that's what he does. And then you're welcome to go to vmuseum.org and get information about our museums online as well. And yes, Kevin's very good at pointing out what I get wrong. And so at this point, if anybody has any questions or whatever, I know there's another session, so we need to clear out of here to allow the next presenter in, I believe. So, but I'm happy to, have a side discussion or whatever with anyone. If you would like a copy of LMs to the museum, I have a note card with them. Just send me an IM, and over the next few minutes, I'll go through my IMs and respond with the note card. So please do that if so. But otherwise, thanks for joining me for the hour. I do want to clear out the area for the next presenter. Thank you, everybody. So, Beth, I know you're one of the hosts. Is there another presenter right after us? I think there is. I don't know if you're trying to speak. We can't hear you, Beth. All I'm hearing is static. Okay. Well, I'm going to move out because I do think